The train was cutting through the dense midnight fog, its iron wheels humming a monotonous tune on the tracks. It was the Midnight Express from Black Hollow to Winchester, a long stretch of railroad that many passengers used for overnight travel. Most of the riders were dozing off, lulled by the rhythmic motion of the train, while a few others sat hunched over books or engaged in quiet conversation. Alan Firth, a traveling salesman, glanced at his pocket watch. The train was right on schedule. The digital clock above the compartment door blinked 12:47 a.m. Another 2 hours and he'd be home. Then, without warning, the train shuddered violently and began to slow. A metallic groan echoed through the cars, causing passengers to jolt awake. Murmurs of confusion spread as the train jerked to a halt. The overhead lights flickered once, then dimmed, leaving only the emergency lighting to cast an eerie glow over the cabin. Alan leaned towards the window, pressing his forehead against the glass. The train had stopped at an old station, a decrepit, rotting husk of a structure. The sign, rusted and half-broken, was barely legible: Ravenscroft Terminal. The name sent a chill through him. He had never heard of a Ravenscroft terminal on this route. In fact, he was sure there was no station between Black Hollow and Winchester at all. The intercom crackled to life, and the conductor's voice, strangely strained, announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing an unexpected delay. Please remain seated. We will be back on our way shortly." Something about his tone felt off. Uneasy glances passed between passengers. The train was supposed to be express. No stops, no deviations. A woman a few seats away whispered, "This place looks abandoned." Indeed, the platform outside was desolate, save for the skeletal remains of a bench and a rusted lamp post emitting a sickly yellow glow. The mist rolled across the tracks, shifting like grasping fingers. Then something moved. A shape, tall and angular, lurked at the far end of the platform. Alan's breath hitched as he saw it. A man, or something that resembled one, wearing a long, tattered coat, its face obscured by shadow. The figure stood impossibly still, watching. A sudden pounding from the compartment door made everyone jump. A terrified scream rang out from the adjoining car. Alan rose instinctively, his pulse hammering in his throat. "What the hell is going on?" someone cried. The door creaked open, and a woman from the next compartment stumbled in, wild-eyed and pale. "They're outside," she gasped. "They're knocking on the windows." As if on cue, a series of sharp, rhythmic knocks echoed from the windows of their car. Alan turned, his stomach twisting. Dark silhouettes crowded the fogged-up glass, their hands pressed against it. Their fingers were too long. Their faces were just smears of darkness, features blurred as though seen through water. One passenger, a burly man named Gregory, stepped forward. "This some kind of sick joke?" No one answered. The shapes outside remained motionless. Then the train's emergency lights flickered, and an oppressive darkness swallowed the car for a split second. When the lights returned, the windows were smeared with handprints that hadn't been there before. A scream erupted from the back of the car as a passenger, an elderly man, collapsed to the floor, convulsing. His mouth foamed and his eyes rolled back. People rushed to his side, but he was already dead. Then the whispering began. It slithered through the air, a chorus of voices that didn't belong to anyone inside the train. low, guttural, and hungry. The intercom crackled again, but this time the conductor's voice was distorted, garbled, like a tape being played backward. The only clear word anyone could make out was, "Leave." Alan turned back to the window. The platform was no longer empty. A crowd had gathered. Their forms were indistinct, shifting in and out of focus, as if reality struggled to hold them in place. Their heads twitched at odd angles and their hollow eyes bored into the passengers. Then, as if responding to an unseen command, they stepped onto the train. The doors hadn't opened. They simply moved through them. Panic erupted. People screamed and clawed at the doors, trying to break them down. Alan grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall, wielding it like a weapon. The figures advanced, their distorted forms unraveling like loose threads in a tapestry. Their mouths stretched wide, revealing nothing but a void of endless blackness. One by one, the passengers began to vanish. Not killed, not taken, just erased. Their bodies folded into themselves, leaving only a faint shimmer where they had stood. Alan fought against the crushing tide of fear. He turned, desperate, toward the front of the car. The conductor was there, but his face was wrong. Too smooth, too featureless. Then the train jerked violently, throwing everyone to the floor. The figures let out a shriek that shattered the glass. And then, silence. The train was moving again. Alan gasped, his hands shaking. The grotesque figures were gone. The passengers who had vanished did not return. The station of Ravenscroft Terminal had disappeared into the fog as if it had never existed. The intercom buzzed. The conductor's voice was back to normal. "Apologies for the delay, ladies and gentlemen. We are back on schedule." Alan looked around. Fewer passengers than before. Too few. Had they ever been there? The train pulled into Winchester Station at 3 a.m., right on schedule. As Alan stepped onto the platform, he glanced back at the train's window, half expecting to see those horrible figures reflected back at him. But there was only his own pale face staring back. A porter walked by, tipping his hat. "Long ride, sir?" Alan hesitated, then asked, "That station? Ravenscroft Terminal. What is that place?" The porter stopped, frowning. "Ravenscroft? Sir, there's no such station on this line. Never was." Alan turned back to the train just as its doors slid shut. Through the window he saw a passenger still sitting inside. A passenger who hadn't been there before. A passenger whose face was a smooth, featureless void. And then the train pulled away into the mist, leaving Alan with a feeling that the night would never truly end.